This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA Conference Finals, knee deep in drama. Welcome to the party, Toronto, Jurassic Park. It is completely off the chain. I mean, we got all the wild is out now that the Toronto Raptors have taken one in this conference finals. And I mean, you have to be completely elated because probably people from Midwest to the West Coast would have any kind of formidable interest in anything happening in the conference finals. But now we actually have some games being played and an exciting time, not only happening on the basketball court, but certainly a lot of action happening off the basketball court. And I can't wait to get all up in it with y'all. And of course, you know, I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Dime Mag contributor, writer for one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net. Big Kahuna and PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Hey, man, did you see Cassidy Hubbarth doing her thing on the His and Hers podcast for ESPN? I think she's getting comfortable, you know, in her role as being a guest analyst, man, after she jumped on our podcast and did her thing.
Absolutely, man. Salute to Cassidy Hubbarth and salute to all the fans and listeners of the NBA Baseline. Thank you for tuning in to another week's of NBA basketball discussion and chat here. As you know, again, knee deep, as my man said, here in the conference finals. Lots to discuss, stuff going on in the coaching savagery, coaching carousel, whatever you want to call it. All that news is still all on our brains and a lot to discuss with that. So let's jump right in as always, man.
Yeah, man. And we've got an excellent show for you guys. Of course, you know, we're going to be talking about the conference finals, looking at down the stretch, the remaining games played between the Toronto Raptors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Can the Toronto Raptors get it done? Or, you know, was this just a one bad game, a one-off game for the Cleveland Cavaliers? A lot of dynamics exposed in that game over the weekend when the Cavs played the Toronto Raptors in Toronto. But then all eyes are going to be focused on the dogfight, as my man Shaw has alluded to, between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Golden State Warriors. So we can't wait to talk about the conference finals. We also have two really great guests on board to help us talk a little bit about the coaching savagery situation as it's progressed now over the last week and a half. Clearly the situations with the Orlando Magic, with the Houston Rockets, and the New York Knicks. And we were able to get our man, Jared Dubin, who covers the NBA, specifically New York sports. He's going to be on to talk Knicks basketball and the situation with the hiring of Jeff Hornacek. And we got our man who we had him on before, and he was not afraid to fire off some shots. I mean, as our man, the Rocket Man, we like to call him, our boy Max Croes. He's going to be on board in a little bit to help us talk about the situation regarding the Houston Rockets. And of course, we've got our coveted Coast to Coast, where we give you all the news taking place happening in the association. So a lot to talk about, a lot on tap. And look, man, we always are appreciative of you and yours hopping on board, checking this out for at least an hour or so of your day as we discuss and break down the goods that are happening in the NBA. As always, get at my man Shaw, at Shaw Sports, and get at me at GameFaceLee. We always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA_the baseline, hashtag up the baseline. Let us know who you are and what you're about. Available on major platforms like Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, iTunes, and Player FM. Also available now on Google Music. So, you know, definitely check us out. My man Shaw has alluded to the fact that we are doing our thing on Roku. As usual, go to any of these major platforms, man. We are broadening our horizons. We're expanding, and the show is continuing to get a lot of talk, a lot of buzz, but it can't be done without y'all. So definitely hop on any of those platforms, drop a comment, give us a thought, give us their opinion, but let us know what you think about how we're doing as we cover the goods, discussing all things NBA. You know how we do, and you know how we like to set it off. It is time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And listen, this is what it comes down to. You know, we talk about how you go through the regular season, you go through the accolades, the awards have been handed out, the praises have been given, but this is about which two out of the four teams that are left standing really wants to get to the finals, to give themselves an opportunity to hoist a trophy that one, organization or one franchise is yet to hoist in its illustrious history. Another hasn't even sniffed out being in the conference finals to get to this particular point would really cap to what would be considered a Cinderella story. One who's pretty much have done the impossible within a 30-year span and has shown that they are a team that is going to be a force to reckon with the next few years, and one that we've been itching and hoping and praying for since being moved from Seattle to give themselves another chance at what they failed to do in 2012. These are some great storylines, Shaw, but this is exactly why we are captivated now with the conference finals, because we're now starting to see these teams identify themselves and are starting to show themselves as we get closer and closer, to finalizing who's going to be those two teams. We're talking about the Cavaliers and the Raptors and the Warriors and the Thunder. And if people are not paying attention, maybe because they expected this just to be a Warriors-Cavaliers rematch, they better look again, because there are two other teams now that are really making some noise about this.
I think that's a great point. This is not just the coronation, if you will, of a rematch. The Thunder and Raptors are going to fight to the very end. And although nobody is really giving the Toronto Raptors much of a chance, they've come out and decided that they know where they need to stop the Cavs at. They know where they need to dig in defensively at. And just even getting back at home in this series has helped them get back into the series in general. And I think Toronto is definitely going to make sure that this series goes a little bit longer than maybe some had projected. There'll be no sweeps here in the East or the Western Conference Finals, and that's what you want to see. You just want to see great basketball from whoever's playing. And yes, it still may end up being Golden State and Cleveland when it all comes down to it, but nonetheless, I love that OKC and Toronto are putting up the fight that they have, and OKC probably still has a very, very legitimate chance to actually maybe even upset Golden State Warriors in the West.
All right, I want to focus our attention on the Cavaliers and the Raptors, because earlier in my intro, I said, welcome to the conference finals, Toronto. And let me preface this by saying that I'm not saying that the Toronto Raptors, were a team that was just completely lost, like, a deer looking in headlights or anything like that. What I'm saying is that I think sometimes when you get yourself to a situation, when you get yourself to a place and you try to retread back to all of the things that took you to get to this point, you try to exactify everything that you did. You try to put everything exactly where it is, because you feel like if you don't, anything that's out of place, anything that's out of whack will completely throw you off and could probably damage your psyche and your focus on what you got to do to get you through, an improbable situation for yourself or a place that you've never thought you've been before. What I commend the Toronto Raptors for, and listen, I'm going to probably give more credit again to Dwayne Casey on this, is these guys are quickly figuring out who they need to be if they're going to give themselves a chance to compete against a team who has a player who has been there already 5 times in a row, who knows how to talk to his personnel, to his players, to his colleagues, to his guys, to get them to the point that he wants them to be at. The Raptors don't have that luxury. But what they do have is knowing that they know who they are and what they got to do to get themselves to a point where they can maintain a level of competitiveness that's necessary to stay in this conference finals.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head, because they've identified their weakness in the first 2 games in terms of not really moving the ball around enough, but more so not locking in on the defensive side. And Bismack Biyombo, I want to call him Bismack Show Me the Money Biyombo, because nobody has made more money for himself in these playoffs than Bismack has as he's going to enter free agency. And he's done a great job for them, clogging up the paint, being physical, not afraid of any of the Cavaliers, whether it's LeBron, Kyrie, Kevin Love, it doesn't matter who's coming in the lane. Biz is going to make sure that they feel him. And he's going out there and rebounding the ball and limiting the Cavaliers onto one shot. And that's where Toronto is definitely hanging their head.
Give him the biz, baby. Give him the biz. You know what I'm saying? Give the business. That is business. Exactly. But again, this is a byproduct of, teams tending to lose themselves because, they're worrying too much about how they probably need to be to combat, what the Cleveland Cavaliers have started to do. Look, the Cleveland Cavaliers were never this 3 savvy, right? But the Toronto Raptors were never that offensively savvy either. So if their defense doesn't pick up, They don't give themselves a chance to make the necessary adjustments, like in this sense, playing more physical with the Cleveland Cavaliers and being able to force the Cavaliers to take tougher shots. When you're able to take two of the three big players from that team, I think it makes it easier to put the onus on guys like J.R. Smith, Channing Frye, Matthew Dellavedova, Richard Jefferson, Tristan Thompson, Iman Shumpert, and all these other guys that suddenly have found themselves basking in the glow of this offensive glory that the Cavaliers have been on the first 11 games, in this playoff run. But once you start putting the pressure and, like you said, making them feel you, now all of a sudden those shots get a little bit tighter. Those cuts to the basket, the margin for error becomes a little bit more scrutinized. And then you now put the onus back on guys like LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love to do something that they feel like they're forcing themselves to have to do, and they just can't easily pull it out there if you continue to put the pressure on them when it needs to be done.
Right. The pressure was what I think really forced the Cavaliers in the last game there and in game 3 to miss a lot of shots. Kyrie and Kevin Love in specific. LeBron still did his thing. It was effective, but he didn't have his running mates that he's had the entire run of these playoffs thus far in 2016. So you don't expect both of those guys, Kyrie and Kevin Love, both to be off again. But I think you do need to rough them up. And, again, within the framework of the rules, obviously, and just make sure you're contesting every shot. Kyrie's going to shake you. He's going to get into the lane. But Bismack has been doing a great job, cheating off of his man at times to make sure that Kyrie doesn't have an unobstructed view to the rim. And I think that's something that Toronto needs to continue to do. And obviously getting that contribution, from guys like Terrence Ross coming off the bench, even Patrick Patterson now going back into a bench role, which I was calling for Scola. Not that he's been all that great in this series. He hasn't really done much. But I was calling for Scola to start in the last series versus Miami, simply because it kind of put Patterson back in his normal rotation, and also Scola had the ability to score against a smaller Miami team. Now, fast forward, we're obviously in the conference finals, and then I think just putting Patterson back in his rotation is what Scola's been able to do. Toronto is they're definitely going to fight. They're not going to be efficient. It's not going to be very, very. It's not going to be aesthetically pleasing basketball watching them do it, but they're okay with that. As long as it equates to a W, that's all they care about. And if they can get another one, even up the series, then I guess all bets are off. And maybe your wild, crazy prediction, that conspiracy theory, may come to fruition.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, discussion of the conference finals, Toronto Raptors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Toronto Raptors put one on the board. So this clearly, like Shaw said earlier, this is not going to be a sweep. Shaw, before we talk about the Thunder and the Warriors, what do we think about right now regarding the histrionics of LeBron James and these tendencies that I'm beginning to see once again? I don't know if whether or not we're going to make much of anything from it, so to speak, but I will say that it kind of lends a little bit to the characterization that sometimes puts me off about a team that really should be just focused on handling their business. Like, if this Cleveland Cavaliers team makes the kind of run that they should be capable of making to get themselves to the finals, you can mirror a little bit of what teams like the Chicago Bulls did in any one of their first three-peats, and you could say, this is just how damn good the Cleveland Cavaliers are. Then we see this kind of game, and we say to ourselves, not so much the fact that you took an L, but it's the things that are happening in between the baselines that are showing tendencies where if a team that's really good coming out of the Western Conference exposes this Cavaliers team, it wouldn't surprise me at all that they continue to show fallacies in their way, because I just don't think that they still truly get it. And I think it becomes a mist if we don't talk about it.
Well, I mean, I think the Cavs, they've done a lot this playoffs in particular, trying to build the chemistry and understanding what it takes to win. Obviously, they had the coaching change much earlier in the season. LeBron, whether or not he's the real coach of this team or whatever, I think we've kind of gotten past all of that. And they're a team now that, one loss in the playoffs isn't going to define them or derail their season. I mean, it's very, very hard for a team to win 16 games to get an NBA Finals, let alone try to go undefeated in that quest. I think at the end of the day, they're just worried about making sure that, Game 3 doesn't become a pattern for them. they get back to playing the basketball that they know how to. Consistent ball movement, because I think what you saw was when things got tight and it started to struggle, LeBron was like, well, damn, where's the help? And then Kyrie was pressing. Listen, trust the process, people. Trust the things that you've been doing that have gotten you to the point, and that had you playing such great basketball. We all know that those threes that they were shooting in the first two series, that wasn't a sustainable thing for them to do. But the ball movement is something that they can sustain. And if they keep Toronto's defense moving and shuffling on the perimeter, they'll eventually get good shots. And they have some shot makers that can definitely knock things down for them.
All right, Shaw, let's go ahead and switch gears now and talk about the series that I know everyone is completely fixated upon, which is the Thunder and the Warriors. We said the word dogfight is pretty much the appropriate terminology to use when we're talking about arguably 3 of the 5 best players in the game of basketball, but really one of the deepest teams in the NBA, obviously the deepest team that you could really make that argument for. And then you have a team that really is just itching to truly identify themselves and put themselves in the fray of, if we stay together, what could we possibly be? What could we have possibly been from 2012 up to this particular point if things fell into place and injuries didn't happen? We're seeing this competitive balance begin to shift when we talk about this, because ultimately during the regular season, this was always about the Golden State Warriors. Now we're talking about, what if not the Golden State Warriors, and the team that wants to answer that bell is the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Yeah, OKC is, I think, one of those teams that you see them now. They slayed one giant, as we talked about in our conference finals preview, and now they're up against another giant. And OKC has every design, every wish, every desire to upset the Golden State, and they don't feel like that it would be that. And they've done a great job so far in the series of definitely keeping things close, especially in Game 1. When they won that game and making this a competitive series, as we all knew it would be. But it really comes down to, what are they going to be able to do from an offensive side of the things, and then even more so defensively. Will they get somebody now off that bench to help lock things in for them, to not make it be such a struggle for them when they go to the reserve guys? A lot of talk about whether Cantor can play in this series. A lot of talk about even if Robertson can play in this series, and that leaves guys like Waiters and Adams with more of a role to play. That's where OKC really needs to figure things out. But going home, you hope that that kind of gives that boost that some of those reserve guys and some of those role guys need to be competitive and to make Golden State sweat a little bit. Although the Warriors still are the heavy favorites. Is
it still going to come down to, everyone is fixated on which superstar should step up for their respective teams? When we talk about Steph Curry and we talk about Kevin Durant, it kind of boggles my mind because we're not talking about Russell Westbrook in the same fold. But I lend to this idea. If we brought Russell Westbrook into this fold, because I think we can safely say within a 7-game series, either one of these two guys, Curry and Durant, is going to get themselves what they need to do, get themselves off the way that they need to. But I'm more curious about Klay Thompson factor, the Draymond Green factor, that would, in a chess pawn type thing, match what the Westbrook, initiative brings to the table. Who do you think for the Golden State Warriors really should have that impact to offset what Westbrook would bring to the table, should his game be on simultaneously as Durant's would be, that Steph Curry would have to accompany themselves with to assure the Warriors to advance?
Well, I still think it's Draymond Green. He's been really much as much of a catalyst as anybody in that team can be, because of what he does on both sides of the basketball. And if he's out there and he's making guys like Cantor and Adams or even Ibaka work on that side of the basketball, and maybe even stretching the floor a little bit. Not say that he needs to be knocking down 5-6 threes a game, but even if he's out at the free throw line extended, and not down there in the post where they are going to have to struggle and make a decision. If he can become a decent mid-range shooter in the series, if you will, and I've seen him do things that I didn't know he was capable of doing in terms of even, like, I think he crossed Cantor up in Game 2, and pulled up from about 18. I was like, I just, as much as I've been watching basketball, I've been watching the Golden State Warriors for the last 2 years. That was something I didn't really think he had in his game. And he has a little bit of shake if other big guys are on him. So I think Green is definitely the key to what Golden State Warriors are trying to do on both sides of the basketball.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, discussion of the conference finals. Couple of more points, Shaw, before we break on out through this. let's put it where it needs to be, Shaw. When you look at this matchup, when you look at what this is going to take, outside of the X's and O's, who do you think really needs to rely more on the play than the X's and O's, or more so rely on the X's and O's than the play when you're talking about Steve Kerr and you're talking about Billy Donovan?
Well, it's funny because I think Golden State is a more disciplined team, and I think there's not much dispute about that fact per se. So X's and O's wise, you figure Kerr and the Warriors are definitely going to be masters of execution throughout the rest of the series, and whereas KD and Westbrook are just going to rely on their talent and try to will their way into wins and hopefully eventually winning the series outright. But I do feel like Donovan did a great job, as I've said many times now, did a great job in the last series versus San Antonio, and now needs to figure out a way to what X's and O's, what adjustments does he make to make his team and to give his team the appropriate help to back up his two superstars. I think again that Robertson thing needs to be not necessarily objectified, but needs to be analyzed rather, and to figure out, okay, can he play, and is it Waiters or is it a guy like Morrow? If Waiters is out there, Waiters can quote unquote can try to play make, but he doesn't really pass the ball enough. So if that's the case, would you rather have a knockdown guy out there like Morrow, who's not going to hurt you any more defensively than Waiters would? Is that an adjustment that you make now, and hopefully that he can get on track and give you some of the spacing so that your main guys, Westbrook and Durant, can operate? That 1-3 pick and roll, if Westbrook and Durant decide to run that is pretty much unstoppable. But it was stoppable because they weren't guarding Robertson at all, and that basically was forcing the roll man to have 2 or 3 guys sucked in on him, which was oftentimes Durant. Those are the X's and O's Donovan needs to think about. What can he do offensively to continue to get shots and make sure that he doesn't give up too much defensively?
All right, well, there you have it. 4 teams left. Golden State, Oklahoma City. They're going to be battling it out. It's likely to go 6, possibly even 7, with the way both teams are really getting at each other. And listen, the series doesn't start until obviously a team wins on the road. Can the Warriors obviously pull one out in one of the noisiest places in Oklahoma City? And for the Toronto Raptors, welcome to the party, man. Showing up and really punching the Cleveland Cavaliers in the mouth. Can they duplicate what they've done as well, too? This is the makings for some excellent conference finals, so you guys make sure that you're tuned in. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA podcast. A lot of topics to get into in this week's segment of The Drop. And Shaw, it's really interesting because, we've been talking about the situation, the state of the NBA, and that it's coaching savagery. Well, if you're the Orlando Magic and you're the Orlando Magic fan base, maybe the terminology should be coaching salvagery. Interesting situation, that occurred in the last week and a half, you want to say, maybe 2 weeks. Indiana Pacers, Larry Bird, president of basketball operations, basically drops a bomb here in the NBA community by saying, we're not going to renew the contract for, Frank Vogel. And then, listen, Larry Bird is just being Larry Bird. I love how the fact he just likes to keep it real. He doesn't really sugarcoat anything. It's probably pretty clear he's not enamored with Frank Vogel, even though Frank Vogel did a spectacular job. Given the roster that he had with the Pacers, got them into the playoffs, got them to a Game 7 in the first round. And, whether they made it or didn't make it, I don't think it really would have made, any kind of a difference on whether or not Vogel would still be the head coach for the Indiana Pacers. But of all of the teams that we did not expect Frank Vogel to find a landing spot for, the Orlando Magic. And maybe it's just crazy to me because of the fact that Scott Skiles, quote unquote, suddenly decides to resign from his position. But I still didn't see the Orlando Magic being as a viable team that Frank Vogel could kind of get his hands in. And now he's probably working with Velvet Goldmine over there, bro.
You're right. And I think that's exactly the angle we need to take from this. Nobody saw it coming, I think, from any side. A month ago, you wouldn't be thinking, Frank Vogel and Orlando Magic would be flirting or dancing together, and then let alone that he'd actually be the head coach. So Skiles was still there, Vogel was still in Indiana, and both situations just kind of happened out of nowhere, if you will. And a lot of people thought initially it was almost as done a deal as Jaeger was to Sacramento. Was people were saying about Vogel basically taking Jaeger's spot in Memphis in terms of it being a fit, defensive minded, the whole 9, grit and grind that seemed to fit Vogel's mentality. But Orlando opened up. And this is a great hire, I think, for the Magic. He gives them a little bit of what Scott Skiles had in terms of that defensive-minded approach, but also that player development angle that Skiles did not have, because Skiles wanted to deal primarily with veterans. And a lot of people don't realize Vogel deserves a lot of credit for developing the careers of Paul George and even Lance Stevenson when he was there in Indiana, and even to a lesser degree, for the year that he spent with Miles Turner this past season. So you look at guys like Hazonia and Aaron Gordon and Oladipo and Vucevic and Elfrid Payton. All these are young guys, young talented guys, and you might think, okay, maybe that's too much for him to try to do at one time, but I think he's going to be a good fit for them and give them that defensive presence that they've lacked. And they lost so many close games last year, and Vogel's about execution. And I think he'll have a little bit more patience with his young guys in Scottsdale.
Now, in a recent interview with the Orlando Sentinel, or at least the article that I checked out from the Orlando Sentinel's Mike Bianchi, and it's great that you could check it out. Listen, we're not trying to make any headways or anything like that. Nothing is needed. You don't need no presser when it comes to this type of scenario or situation. But I do find it very interesting that we're seeing a little bit more of the Vogel being vocal here, because he made it be known, hey, I really don't care why Scott Skiles left this team. And he even said, I think that this Magic team can be better than the Indiana Pacers teams that he's coached. Now, that could be press fodder, but I got to tell you, man, if you are an Orlando Magic fan, you got to feel really good hearing your head coach coming out speaking in this kind of manner. He's like, I really don't give a damn what happened with this Magic team. Now that you're under my watch, we're going to be better than what you guys have even expected.
Yeah, and he's a confident guy, and a lot of people wanted him. I think.
But Shaw, to your point about that confidence, I don't think that we ever really truly saw that confidence come out, because I felt like it was suppressed under the greatness of Larry Bird.
And that is a great point as well. I mean, Bird is a guy who's mercurial a little bit and prickly, and I think Vogel maybe as well too. But Vogel knew that Bird gave him the shot. So to come out and speak against anything that would have been contrary to Bird's wishes were for that organization would have been seen as detrimental to his career. Now that Vogel was unceremoniously let go or not renewed, if you will, it gave him an opportunity now to really be vocal and give a true voice to this Orlando Magic team that I think desperately needs one from the coaching sidelines, if you will. Listen, because Hennigan's been there, they tried Jacques Vaughn, they tried Scott Skiles, and I think Vogel now can give them some stability. And I really like the fact that he knows what his roster is. Like, well, Bird wanted the Pacers to play fast and shoot a lot of threes just because that's just what he wanted to see. Vogel understood that that wasn't the roster that he had, and he tried to implement Bird style for a little while and then had to go back to what fit the roster better. I think he's already come out and said that he knows that this Orlando Magic team can do some of those things and is willing to try to take a more analytical approach and shoot those threes and get more of that pace and space flow, because he has young guys, young talented guys who can do all the things that require in today's NBA game.
Let's credit, though, Rob Hennigan for not allowing Scott Skiles to dial back from what I think he's been wanting. I'm sorry, Scott Skiles, but Frank Vogel from saying what I think he wants to say. Not necessarily what should be said or what has to be said, but what he wants to say. Sometimes you guys say, hey, I don't want this to be like a personal riff. You know what? If you're the Orlando Magic, you need some personal riff. You need a little bit of something personal in you, because right now the Orlando Magic has been one of the more quiet, irrelevant basketball teams in the NBA. And it wasn't but like 7 years ago, Shaw, we were talking about how this team is getting underneath the skin and really just screwing up the dynamics for, most teams, the Boston Celtics, for the Cleveland Cavaliers when they had LeBron James. The Orlando Magic was right in the crux of that. And a lot of that goes to the credit of a Stan Van Gundy and his persona and style and how he coached and carried this team. And we could be seeing a replication of that with Frank Vogel with these young guys. And if Hennigan does his job and does it well, this could be a very, very good combination.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one thing that you have to take into consideration is that this may not be the entire roster as it stands. They have a lot of young talent, as I just alluded to, and they could acquire an all-star caliber veteran that can, push them ahead. And I think Vogel and Hennigan both realize, hey, this is a situation where Orlando is tired of losing, not making the playoffs, and Vogel didn't come here to fight on the edge of the playoffs and barely get in. They want to go there and they want to win, and they want to be more than just competitive. They want to be eventually championship contenders. And I don't know that this roster, as we see it with all that young talent, because like even now kind of going back on that thought, it might be too much to try to develop all at once. So maybe you see one or two of those guys move for a veteran guy who can also help Vogel with the player development and also with the leadership role in the locker room. But either way, I think both Vogel and Hennigan are very confident in what they've accomplished this year. And again, I agree with you 100%. Credit Hennigan for not wasting time. They saw an opportunity once, they got this crap storm dropped on their lap with Scott Skiles. And you know what? Here's a guy who's out there who's probably the best candidate by almost everybody else's account. And they went and got him quickly. And Vogel looks like he's going to be a good hire for Orlando. A lot different from what I was saying and anything you were saying even last year they hired Scott Skiles.
All right, Shaw, real quick. Who do you think benefits more from the hiring of Scott Skiles, who already has an immediate upgrade to thriving from what Scott Skiles will implement in the system? When you look at the young roster between Payton, between Oladipo, Vucevic, who do you think is going to thrive from that?
Well, they've already talked about with Vogel coming there that Vucevic and Payton are probably going to be the biggest beneficiaries, if you will. Payton simply because Skiles hated him. Skiles did not think that Payton was an NBA point guard and somebody that the Orlando Magic can build around. And I think you're going to see just kind of having that off of his back, that monkey off his back now, where he will have the ability and freedom to play and even make mistakes at times to go out there and do what he needs to do. You'll see Vogel really help him in his development, and Vucevic too, because even in the press conference, he talked about how they developed guys, it seems like so long ago now, but even when Roy Hibbert was in Indiana, how he taught Roy Hibbert the angles of the NBA and what it was like to be a big man in a dying breed, if you will, dying era of the big man. Vucevic can be very, very effective out there, and he has been. And still very young too, and can shoot the jumper and can rebound. Not a great shot blocker yet, but Vogel will teach him some of those things from a defense standpoint, where just to be effective, you don't have to block everything in out of the sky. I think those are the two guys you're going to see Orlando really take a step forward with, Elfrid Payton and Nikola Vucevic.
Well, uninterested Scott Skiles to be maintaining the head coaching position for the Magic, 35 wins. Frank Vogel helped the Indiana Pacers to 45. So listen, 35 to 45, I don't think that it's a stretch. And you can't find me that there isn't going to be a head coach that can't get you 10 plus wins by getting these guys to execute better down the stretch. I'd be very interested if we could pull numbers at some point, Shaw, to see how many games the Orlando Magic could have won when they were in close victories. Because at the early set of the season, Shaw, we said that one of the more impressive things about the Orlando Magic was how competitive these guys play for 4 quarters, and that they left some games out there on the basketball court that could have equaled out to possibly be a 40-win season rather than it being a 35.
Yeah, they were a team that was very competitive early on. We had our man John Denton from OrlandoMagic.com come on and talk about how great the team was, how Skiles had got them to buy in. They were playing a mix of old school and new school, if you will. The new school offense with the old school defense, and things were great. Oladipo wasn't accepting of his bench role, but he was playing it. He just knew, okay, at this point, this is what the team needs, and they were doing their thing. But then it all fell apart. More injuries started to mount. They made a trade and acquired Brandon Jennings as well too, and Vucevic was out for a while, and it just didn't go the way the Orlando Magic had hoped, especially after such a great start. And you're right, they lost so many close games in the fourth quarter where it just became a matter of their inexperience and not able to execute. And those are the games that Scott Skiles, it drove him absolutely batshit crazy. He just was unable to handle it, and I think just that frustration is kind of what led to his overall stepping down, if you will, from Orlando Magic. But again, I think this is probably a blessing in disguise, because Skiles is a guy who grates on you. I keep saying this. He eventually wears down, and he might have probably, have gotten fired at some point anyway. So the fact that he took himself out of the running, if you will, and allowed the Magic to get them a great coach in Frank Vogel, I think the Magic can't be any happier with the situation with how it turned out.
Indeed, Shaw. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA podcast. And since we've now transitioned gears from Coaching Savagery to Coaching Salvagery, maybe the next move when we're talking about this team, the New York Knicks, should be as the benefactor of Phil Jackson and what he has had to do to go through his process. Maybe the proper terminology should be coaching savvy, because clearly no one saw the selection of Jeff Hornacek coming. And here to discuss what's happening with the New York Knicks, we got our man Jared Dubin. He covers all things Knicks basketball. He's on a variety of websites. Great article. Does very well covering the Knicks. Jared, thanks for joining on with us this week to talk about what's happening out there in the Big Apple.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, Jared. And please feel free to let out the emotions. I don't know if it's joy, confusion, or maybe jumping off the Empire State Building. But what is your reaction of all of the people in the selection process for the head coaching position for the New York Knicks? They come up with Jeff Hornacek.
I think it's mostly just surprise more than anything else. Like most people, I expected them to hire Kurt Rambis. Every report suggested that's what was going to happen. Everybody that I personally talked to suggested that, even if he did like David Blatt or Frank Vogel or whoever, that it was still probably going to be Kurt Rambis. So to see it actually result in somebody else getting hired, the first thing I thought was that I was just shocked. It did not line up with what anybody thought about this search. But then, you look at that and think like maybe that's what we should have expected all along. There have been a lot of reports and a lot of leaks about what Phil's plans might be at various points throughout his tenure so far with the Knicks, and none of them have been right. Basically, every time there comes out with a report, it doesn't actually happen. So maybe that's what we should start expecting from now on.
So when you look at this as being the surprise that it was for everybody, I think in the NBA community, I think there are a lot of question remains here. Like, okay, what exactly type of coach is Jeff Hornacek? And then even more so, what does this say about Phil Jackson and the direction that he's taking the New York Knicks, making this type of hire? Is he now, obviously he's relenting from his, I need to bring in somebody from my good old boy system, if you will. But how do you feel, about the Knicks' direction now with the hiring of Hornacek?
I think you're right that we don't necessarily know what kind of coach he is. Everybody keeps talking about the way his team played in Phoenix and suggesting that's the way the Knicks will play. But, he's only had the one job, and the roster he had there was about as different from the Knicks roster as a roster could possibly be. That team was based all around its guard play. The best players on the team were, at first it was 2 point guards in Goran Dragic and Eric Bledsoe, and then it was 3 point guards when they added Isaiah Thomas. The Knicks basically have no starting caliber NBA guards right now, which is, the exact opposite of what that Phoenix team was. The strength of their team is the front court with Carmelo Anthony and Porzingis and Robin Lopez. So to expect them to play exactly the same way as Hornacek's Phoenix teams did, I think is a little bit misguided, only because, one of the founding things that Hornacek has talked about in interviews is that, you want to adjust the way you do things to the guys that are actually on your roster. I don't expect him to necessarily shoehorn the Knicks into the way, his teams played in Phoenix. I would imagine he'll adjust things a bit. So it won't be exactly like those Phoenix squads, especially in terms of the pace, because, both Carmelo and Robin Lopez are sort of, more lumbering guys, take a little bit to get up and down the court. Carmelo's teams have almost never played at a fast pace, with the exception of a few years there in Denver. So that I think will be a little bit different than people expected. The bigger question for me also comes on defense. In Phoenix, he had Mike Longobardi as his sort of defensive coordinator, who he brought over from Boston and had coached under Doc Rivers and Tom Thibodeau. And they used sort of that style defense at first, before they adjusted things a little bit because, say Alex Len, wasn't as good at chasing pick and rolls out to the perimeter or things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how they play defense, because he's got definitely, the two best defensive big men he'll have ever had in Lopez and Porzingis. So that's more interesting to me even than what they might look like offensively, because, and I've said this a bunch of times, the biggest problem with the Knicks over the last, 10, 15 years has been the fact that their defense sucks. They're the worst defensive team in the entire league since Jeff Van Gundy resigned. And they've only had one top 10 defense since then, and that was the year that there was a lockout. So it's much more important to me to see what he winds up doing on that end of the floor.
Jared Dubin joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to check him on Twitter at JADubin5. here's the thing that I think that sticks out in my mind, and I don't know, maybe to some degree, I feel like this is kind of the temperament for a lot of people here in New York. I just think that people are somewhat relieved at the notion or the idea that it's not all about the triangle offense, that there's a level of relief here that whoever it was that they were going to bring into the fold, we're getting away from this, I guess, dictatorship of systematic play that determines greatness in the NBA. If it's Phil Jackson's triangle offense or any other particular offense that Knicks fans believe should be a surefire winner. I think what stands out more than anything is that this is the first time that we're actually looking at the Knicks hiring a head coach while missing out on other notable head coaching names. And the Knicks have always been notorious for making a splash in their hirings when it comes to the head coach. How important was it, in your mind, Jared, that it's more about them getting it right rather than getting what feels right for taking the position of being the head coach for the New York Knicks?
Well, that's been sort of the push and pull of the entire James Dolan era. So much of their like grounding philosophy has been about, doing the splashiest thing or finding the biggest name that they could put on the marquee outside the Garden. And it hasn't worked, literally ever. It has not worked for them at all. So in that sense, would I have liked to see them hire Tom Thibodeau? Yes. Like, that was my preferred coach. I think he's a guy who, when he's in the league, he's one of the 5 best coaches in the league. And he will be a guy that gets his teams to play defense. We've seen that everywhere he's gone, literally, for 25 years, whether he was an assistant or a head coach. And would I at least like to see them talk to him even? That would have been encouraging as well. Still didn't do that, and that's a little bit disappointing. But it is encouraging to see him go outside of, like you said, his insular circle. That was one of the things that people consistently said wasn't going to happen, was that he wouldn't go outside of, the quote-unquote Phil coaching tree or whatever it was. And other than coaching against him, Phil doesn't really have a connection to Jeff Hornacek, other than that he respected Jerry Sloan, who was one of Hornacek's coaches. So, in that sense, I think it shows a little bit of a willingness to be a little bit more flexible than people thought he might be. And, I'm not sure if you read, Howard Beck was the guy who broke the news that Hornacek would be the coach, and he wrote a story a day later about, the process of it happening. And basically, he said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Phil went into the process, with Rambis as his preferred choice, and then, he was very impressed by David Blatt, and then Hornacek won the job with his interview. And that is, I think, an encouraging sign, because it lets you know that they were sort of on the same page philosophically, and that was the reason for the hiring, rather than his name or his system or anything like that.
Well, I think that's a great point to lead into this next question, from a philosophical standpoint now, because we just talked about, even before you came on the show, we're talking about Frank Vogel getting hired and this, that, and the third, and disagreements with Larry Bird, and maybe Bird wanted somebody that was like a little bit more placating to his style, if you will. Do you think Hornacek was potentially hired as a result of that, because he doesn't have the big personality, if you will? I know a lot of rumors about, what happened with Fisher and Phil at the end of things too, but Hornacek is obviously coach, but he doesn't have this overwhelming personality that where he thinks he might be bigger than the team or organization or whatever the case may be. Do you think that had a lot to do with the hiring of Phil? And then even part 2, if you will he be able to handle the New York media, or do you think that's something that's a little bit overblown from an NBA standpoint?
Well, on the first question, I would say, it's possible. I don't necessarily know if Phil cares how big a guy's personality is. I do know, obviously, that he wants to, and this is something he said, to be, quote unquote, simpatico with whoever the coach is and have, a good, base of a relationship. And, from what I know and have heard about Hornacek, he's very agreeable. And even when he was in Phoenix and things were sort of burning down around him, he still had a good relationship with the front office. And, even after he left, he has not thrown anybody from the front office under the bus, which would have been very easy to do, given that, things started coming down around him because they traded Marcus Morris, which enraged Marquise Morris, which resulted in all of the things that happened this year. So it would have been very easy for Hornacek to go out there and blame Ryan McDonough or blame other people in the front office. And he did not do that. So I think that shows that he's able to go along and get along, which I would imagine Phil probably likes. And the second question, as far as handling the media, I think that people have sort of an outdated notion of what the New York media is really like, because it's all based on what the covers of the back pages of the Post and the Daily News are.
Great point.
And it's mostly not like that when you're actually in the room. I know that he's a very, free thinker and sort of free talker. So you might come into clash with some of the, the PR regulations that exist in the Garden. That's just a reality of doing business there. Even Derek Fisher, who was much more of a free speaker when he was a player, never really accepted the premise of questions. When he was the coach of the Knicks, like the most common word to start off his answers in press conferences was no. Even if he wasn't disagreeing with the premise, with the actual question, he would often start off and say, no, I think, and then go on to answer basically a question that wasn't the question you answered. So we'll see if that happens with Hornacek as well. But I don't think it's necessarily, the actual people in the media here are all that difficult to deal with. It's more just, the silly puns on the back page of the Post and the News.
Jared Dubin joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. A couple questions before we let you get out of here, Jared. So what should be the tone for New York fans? Should for Knicks fans, should it be based on, more of a wait and see, or should there be, a level of, I don't want to use the word contentment, but more of a validated focus, because now we're talking about the off season, right? The head coaching position is filled, have to live with it, deal with it, and move on from that. Now it's a matter of, all right, what are we supplementing Carmelo Anthony? And how much of this is going to be predicated on youth movement as much as it is trying to quickly put together a competitive basketball team that can help them balance themselves back into, again, which is still going to be considered a very reasonably weak Eastern Conference situation going into 2016?
I think it's sort of a balance of both. I wouldn't say, hiring Hornacek means they're automatically going to make the playoffs. I would not say that at all. They're still a team that did not win all that many games last year. They almost doubled their win total from last season. I think they went from 17 to, I believe it was 31 wins last
32.
year. 32 wins last year. So they almost doubled their win total. They moved, somewhat in the right direction. Obviously they did fall apart a little bit down the stretch. Some of that was injuries. Some of that were, the tweaks to what they were doing made by Kurt Rambis. Some of it was just that they were out of the playoffs and they got disinterested towards the end of the season. I do think that Knicks fans should be happy that they didn't hire Kurt Rambis. From all of my personal dealings with him, I like him. I think he's a nice person. I think that he was much more open and honest with the media than Derek Fisher was. But from all of the available evidence, he's not a very good head coach. Based on what he did both in Minnesota and then down the stretch of last season with the Knicks, I don't think that necessarily would have been a good hire. So in that sense, Knicks fans, in all likelihood, they got a better coach than they would have if Phil had stuck with Rambis. So in that sense, it's encouraging. But like you said, you do have to see how they fill out the roster. Last year they went for sort of not old veterans, but seasoned veterans. Robin Lopez was 27 years old. They signed him. Aaron Aflalo was 30. I would think that, given the coach they hired and how good they saw Porzingis was last year, that they may concentrate more on younger veterans in like the 24 to 26-year-old range, so that they're still, good or getting better or in their prime by the time Porzingis is ready to be the best player on the team in, 2 or 3 years, rather than guys that fit Melo's timeline. I think that just makes much more sense. We'll see what actually happens this summer. I've been wrong about what their plans would be before. But I think that all falls into sort of the wait and see category, while, the fact that they hired someone who's not Rambis falls into the, there is a little bit of a reason to be encouraged by what they did category.
Last question before we let you get out of here, and it really does kind of involve Kurt Rambis. So, fine, he wasn't hired as the head coach, but does he still have a future in this organization? To maybe be Hornacek's assistant, one of his top assistants, or does he go upstairs to the front office, or do you think he'll be out altogether? What have you heard regarding Rambis' future with the New York Knicks?
Yeah, I actually have not talked to anybody about that specific issue. I saw some reporting from Ian Begley from ESPN, who said that it will be up to Hornacek to decide if Rambis is on the coaching staff. I know that Mark Berman from the Post reported earlier in the search that if Rambis wasn't hired as the head coach, that it's possible he could move into some sort of, assistant GM role or something like that. I don't want to speak out of turn and say something will happen with Rambis, because I just don't know. I haven't talked to anybody about that. I will say that based on other conversations I've had, it wouldn't surprise me if he were out of the organization entirely. My feeling would be that if he's not one of Hornacek's assistants, that Phil would try to find something elsewhere in the organization. But I can't say that, with any degree of, supreme confidence.
He's the nicest, top 5, dead or alive, Jared Dubin. Be sure to check him out. He loves doing his thing, covering the NBA. Again, he's on a plethora of all the major sites that does cover that does cover the association. But you can always catch him on Twitter at JADubin5. Jared, man, we appreciate you hopping on and giving us a little something to grit and grind our teeth with when it comes to Knicks basketball, man.
Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Good times.
All right. Awesome stuff. All right. So let's finally go ahead and transition gears, on our final subject of the drop. And, hey, we saw it not too long ago. Dwight Howard had his intervention thanks to the guys on NBA TNT. But Sean and I felt like it may be that the whole Houston Rockets organization needs some form of intervention. If there's anybody who is capable of tapping into and probably curing this disease that this organization is suffering through, it might be the one guy who dedicates himself in covering all things Houston Rockets and Houston sports. You can always catch him on the Dream Shake. It's our man, Max Croes. And while it seems like where he's located, he's sweating bullets, might be right now when he's finished done having our interview with him, the Houston Rockets might be sweating some bullets themselves. What's going on, Max?
Man, do you guys like Royal Rumbles? We got Les Alexander, James Harden, Daryl Morey, all competing over what they want out of a new head coach, and 14 head coaching candidates. It's like the summit in 1989 when the WWF at the time rolled in with the Royal Rumble.
And look, let's get right into that part of it, Max. That's just a great analogy and way to look at the perspective of what's happening, because I don't think people really truly understand the power dynamic that's going on. Everyone is looking at the misfires of what's happened with Daryl Morey and the moves that he's made and how quickly this Houston Rockets team has fallen from grace from what they did last year to what they've done this year. But there's so much more to that dynamic, and I just want to get your take. What is really going on between Leslie Alexander and Daryl Morey? And is the outcome going to be where Alexander is going to make a move to get Daryl Morey away from being the general manager?
Oh, I don't see that at all. I think Daryl Morey is secure in his job and secure in what he does with the player personnel and the trades and everything. So I don't see Daryl Morey going anywhere. He's got the reputation of being one of the best general managers in the league. I do think that Les Alexander is waiting in here on the coaching situation. And this isn't the first time this happened. Back in 2007, when Morey first became the general manager of the Rockets, they fired Jeff Van Gundy. The firing of Jeff Van Gundy came just 2 weeks after Morey had been on board. And while it was, quote unquote, Morey's decision, Les Alexander had already communicated that he was unhappy with Jeff Van Gundy and didn't want to pay him one more year on the contract and wanted to go a different direction. And so that's the direction that the team went. So I don't think Daryl Morey's job is in doubt here at all. I think that he's solid. But this decision is up in the air. It's a competing interest between James Harden and wanting somebody that he wants to be a head coach. I don't know for sure. I haven't talked to anybody or heard anybody. But I would have to imagine you're not interviewing Kenny Smith for the head coaching job unless James Harden said, hey, have a conversation with that guy. I really like that guy. And then you've got Daryl Morey saying that he wants somebody that's going to crank up the defense, while you got Les Alexander saying he wants somebody that brings experience to the table. So there's all these competing interests. You've got a situation where Les Alexander has had one-on-one sit-down conversations with some of these head coaching candidates without Daryl Morey, and where Daryl Morey and Les Alexander have had some of these conversations together. And you've got guys like Frank Vogel, who probably would have been a good fit for the Rockets, but Les Alexander threw him out of the running, didn't like him enough to bring in the talk with. So there's competing interests here, and all of this goes past the Dwight Howard intervention. All of this goes past the James Harden, on the court work ethic and desire to play. It's its own problem. And the bad news is it's been going on for a month now. And the Rockets have been a franchise over the last decade since Daryl Morey stepped in the door that has been oriented at making good basketball-oriented decisions, being a front office that revolutionizes the way that other teams evaluate players, and led this Moneyball, Morey ball, efficacy and data-driven argument into the game. But right now, we look like any team that's arguing or squabbling between one another on any daily basis. And as a fan of the team and as someone that's followed the team for a long time, it's troubling to see.
Well, where we're at right now, I mean, I think that says a lot about, this team and where they could potentially go. And I'm confused as to, who are the top candidates now. As you mentioned, they, brought in 14 or so candidates already. Can they whittle it down soon, to maybe a top three? And if so, who would those top three be for you as someone who's covered the team as intently as you do?
Well, so right now the team has narrowed it down to a top two for the most part, and it's Mike D'Antoni and Steven Silas, who is the son of former Cavs and Hornets/Pelicans head coach Paul Silas. So that's where the team's at. They're doing two more interviews on Monday. We're recording this on a Sunday. So they're bringing two more folks in. I'm racking my mind to remember. I think that Adrian Griffin is one of them. I can't remember who the second person is. But so this process is still an open process that they're going through. I think they've already missed out on the best candidates. Frank Vogel would have been a good fit for this team, someone that showed that he has a defensive acumen, had the ability to work with hard-nosed players, had the ability to build a positive relationship with a superstar in Paul George, and someone that was able to make something out of nothing with that Pacers team when they first came on the scene and were battling, they were the world beater. They were battling the Celtics. They were battling the Heat, and they stood their ground every time. I think Vogel would have been a good fit for this team, but not something that ever materialized out of the gate. I think that Ettore Messina, the Spurs associate head coach under Greg Popovich, would probably be a good fit for this team as well. We don't know whether or not he's ready to take the entire leap to being a head coach in the NBA, but his pedigree and the success of everybody else that has been built around Greg Popovich leads me to believe that he's somebody that's ready to take a job, and it would have been a good opportunity to try and snag him and get him in the door. So those are the two guys I would have liked to see. The other two we can both rationalize. Mike D'Antoni is someone that's got a lot of experience. He probably meets the bill for what all three of the different parties in James Harden, Les Alexander, and Daryl Morey are looking for. There's a level of compromise there with Mike D'Antoni. That doesn't mean that he fits the bill of what our team needs. We need better defense, and we need someone that's going to be able to motivate the players. He's obviously never been a good defensive coach, and his time in Los Angeles proved that he wasn't able to forge a relationship with the players that were most important to his own success. And then with Stephen Silas, you see someone that could be a Luke Walton-esque situation, where it's someone that's been around the game for a long time, comes from a good pedigree. Eric Spoelstra might be another great example of what Stephen Silas could be. And of course, these go either way for every Eric Spoelstra. You know, there's a couple of failed candidates out there as well. But he's someone that probably brings some new ideas to the table, brings the ability to relate to someone like James Harden. It's been heavily reported that Silas has good relationships with Steph Curry, who he used to be with. And has built good, long-lasting relationships with players that might be difficult to get along with otherwise. And then the last guy I'd say was Dave Yeager was never on the table, but anyone that's capable of coaching Zach Randolph and Tony Allen and get the results he got out of them for years, I would be more than happy to have that person as my head coach. But that's probably why he's on his way to Sacramento to tackle Boogie Cousins.
Max Croes joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, our segment, The Drop. Be sure to catch Max on thedreamshake.com. He's also available on Twitter at CroesFire. Max, I want to go back to your point on, you know, so far what would be considered as the two leading candidates. And I do find it very interesting that D'Antoni would be considered as one of those coaches. I don't think it would be completely far-fetched. But the one thing that really kind of stands out to me is not so much the fact that the confidence would be in D'Antoni being amicable for what they probably would look to do for this Rockets team when you have a guy like James Harden, but what D'Antoni's reputation is as a head coach and surrounding himself with the proper personnel for the points that you made about where the Houston Rockets need to improve at, which obviously would be defensively. And I think more so an emphasis on really making that front court formidable again, whether it is or without Dwight Howard, which I'm pretty sure everybody knows Howard's going to more likely opt out. And I think that you have to go in a different direction anyway. How much of this is it that if you felt that D'Antoni would be that guy, that there is that confidence that he'd build the right coaching staff around so that turnaround could actually happen and deflect what D'Antoni's always been known for, all offense and no defense?
Yeah, and that's a great point to make, because this is a problem that exists in the relationships we've already outlined as well. The Rockets have interviewed 14 people for the head coaching position, but they've interviewed that many people because they're publicly saying that they're searching for an associate head coach at the same time they're searching for a head coach. So that means that whoever gets this head coaching job, likely or not, one of these other 14 guys is going to be their associate head coach without them getting or having a say in it at all. And so for someone like D'Antoni, kind of makes sense that we all know he doesn't bring that much defensive acumen, if any, to the table. And so they're going to be looking for someone that can run the defense for the franchise. But the team also just got burned by J.B. Bickerstaff, who was the lead on the defense for the team. Him taking over was supposed to help us get better on that end. Certainly didn't happen or translate at all. So they're going to have to go out and find guys that are able to turn what the Rockets have into a better full-bodied team. And part of that is going to be the pieces that the Rockets bring in the offseason. Daryl Morey is notorious for bringing in role players or one-way guys that only have a certain skill set. So it's kind of a difficult thing to say that it's going to happen. I'd have to tell you, my confidence is low that we're going to meet the benchmarks of getting everything that we want in the door. If that were going to be the case, the team, which has always been like a basketball results-driven front office, they've waited too long to make this decision already. This isn't in the Daryl Morey, Les Alexander, Houston Rockets front office mold that they're waiting a month to make a decision because it's obviously internal strife at this point. And that means that we're going to find a compromise candidate, but that's not going to bring everything that this team needs or everything that you're saying that we need, which I agree with, but it ain't going to bring it all to the table, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I think this is an interesting point, too. You know, when in terms of bringing in all these guys, this is still a roster that might have a good amount of turnover. So some of these coaches are coming in, they don't even know what they're going to be coaching yet. So how much do you think that's playing into the process too? Or, you know, these guys like, hey, they just want a job. They know traditionally Houston has been a pretty solid franchise in general. But it seems to me that if I was a coach trying to come to the situation, I'd be like, well, you know, Dwight's situation, we don't know if he's coming or going. I think Terrence Jones is a free agent. Obviously, Harden has been rumored to be somewhat difficult to work with. You know, how much do you think that's playing into the decision of some of these other coaches trying to come there?
Yeah, I think that the thing their coach asks themselves a lot more when they come to the Houston Rockets than what's there now is what am I going to have to deal with the circumstances of the roster churn. It's a high burn rate on the Houston Rockets of the players that come in and out of the door. Daryl Morey is always moving and gathering assets. So, like, if you're going to be the coach of the Rockets, you got to accept a couple of facts. The first being that you're going to have to develop players as much as you play them, because the Rockets are always churning out players that they then want to turn into trade material, or that could be guys that reach the next level. For every full-bodied Trevor Ariza you have on the roster, you're going to have a young Chandler Parsons that they're going to ask you to develop. You're going to have a young KJ McDaniels, Clint Capella that they're going to ask you to develop and that they're going to want you to monitor and follow. They're also going to want you to be comfortable with sending guys down to the D-League on a very regular basis, because the team, more than any other in the league, utilizes the D-League as a way to both develop their players and showcase their talent. And then you're going to also have to be ready to deal with guys that maybe don't have the most holistic or level-headed approach to the game. Because Daryl Morey in the Rockets front office loves taking chances on guys that are viewed as being hotheads or out of control, or guys that are difficult to coach, going from Ron Artest all the way to now our current success with Michael Beasley. So you got to accept those certain truths when you walk in the door to coach the Houston Rockets. And that's the big question that coaches, I think, have to ask themselves more so than what are the players that are on the team right now.
Max Croes joining us here. Max, a couple more before we let you hop on out and actually cool out for a little bit. But here's my thing. When I look at this Rockets team, and I think moving forward, obviously, everything is going to be predicated on the decisions that are going to be made and whether those decisions are going to be ultimately unified. But I still got to think, if you're Leslie Alexander, if you're Daryl Morey, and to your point that you said earlier, these guys seem to still have an amicable relationship. And I think now the process now is going to be much more intertwined on what they're going to do to get this Rockets team back to where it needs to be eventually. How much of this is going to be on the fact that you have a dynamic player in James Harden, where the talk is that he is not the kind of guy that's easy to pair him up with, so that you can make a dynamic combination like you have with Westbrook and Durant, or Curry and Thompson, or Kyrie Love and LeBron? Or how much of it is really going to be predicated on the decision-making process of getting that right head coach to kind of suppress the idea that it has to be on Harden to be that guy that has to be the perfect match for whoever they're going to be going after with in free agency?
I think right now the impetus is going to be on James Harden. James Harden just had a season where he spent the offseason before, partying, doing whatever, ad deals, shoe deals, hanging out, and showed up in the camp out of shape. Obviously was playing himself into form at the start of the season. His shot was way off, regardless of, how many minutes he was playing and everything. His shot was just off for the first 6 weeks of this season. So James Harden is going to have to answer the question that you're asking, is what's the level of dedication that you're going to put in both today, tomorrow, and for the rest of the season? And so that's a big question that's going to be answered. I think at this point, the second question of this coach being able to work with James Harden, that's going to be a problem that's unavoidable at this point. If James Harden had a candidate that he wanted, that Daryl Morey and Les Alexander were on board with, that person would have been hired already. But the fact that person hasn't been hired yet signals that there's a struggle still occurring that we were talking about earlier. And James Harden's probably not going to – it's difficult to say he's going to be unhappy with wherever the Rockets arrive at, because we don't know that. But that James Harden, if he had someone, if one of these 14 guys in the list was his guy, I'd have to tell you that the Rockets aren't considering his guy right now.
Before we let you get out of here, last one before you go. I mean, you alluded to it, and we've talked about it kind of throughout the theme of our conversation here is, we talked about some of the guys who they definitely missed out on. But of those guys who are available, and who does Max Croes want to see as the Houston Rockets next coach that's available right now?
Of all the guys that are available right now, of the 14 names that are in consideration, I think I go back and forth between Ettore Messina and now Stephen Silas. I think I'd like to see Messina as the head coach. He's someone that brings upside to the table, the pedigree from Popovich, the experience overseas. He's someone that I think would be interested in buying into the Morey ball, money ball aspect of basketball the Houston Rockets exemplify on the court. The question is just, is he some guy that's going to be able to build a working relationship with James Harden? And I don't know the answer to that question. And then Stephen Silas right now represents someone that brings a lot of upside to the table. I think Mike D'Antoni is the compromise candidate. I think that's who they might go with at the end of the day, because he's someone that fits the bill that all three of these different parties are looking at. But I don't disagree with Stephen Silas being someone that has an opportunity to come to the table. I think whoever takes this job is going to be put in a situation that's so difficult that there might be a burn after 2 years anyway. And so if it's someone young and you're just taking a chance rather than running through somebody like Jeff Van Gundy, who's been through it before but might not be able to bring to the table what he had in the past, then I like the opportunity to take a chance on somebody. But for all that being said and done, if Phil Jackson wants to come on down, bring him on over.
He is the original Rocket man. Forget Elton John. Our brother Max Croes covering the Houston Rockets. Be sure to check him out on Twitter at CroesFire. He's also on thedreamshake.com. Max, man, thanks for hopping on with us so we could talk some Houston Rockets basketball, brother.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I think the Rockets are at a very difficult point right now. It's unfortunate because it's one of their own making. Being the 8th seed against the Golden State Warriors, we all saw what was going to happen there, and you can't fault the team for going in there and giving it a try. But this problem right now with finding a coach and not having somebody in the door yet is a problem of the Rockets' own construction, which is atypical for the approach that they normally take. Frustrating to see. But we got to wait for free agency to play out, the draft to play out, because Daryl Morey's always got tricks up his sleeve to see what he pulls in the door and what this team looks like, ready to go into the Western Conference one more time next season.
All right. Thanks again, Max. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop. Time now to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. The NBA draft lottery is completed. And oh, my goodness gracious. The 76ers, man. I mean, seriously. They are completely minimizing the whole idea of playing the percentages, man. How many years is this now that these guys have got the number one pick, bro? Come on now.
Well, I mean, Philadelphia, they actually haven't had the number one. They've come close, 3, the 5, and things like that, 2 even. But this is the first time they're getting in a good while, and since Iverson, I think it is. And they're very ecstatic about it. But they still had some luck in terms of getting high draft picks, no matter what you want to believe with that tanking thing. And no matter what you want to say, trust the process, as I say in air quotes. It's worked out for the Philadelphia Sixers, and as Hanky is no longer there. But Philly looking very, very bright, getting that number one pick.
I listen, you can tell me what you want to tell me. It just feels like they had a number one pick way too many times over. Maybe it's because of the caliber of player that they wind up selecting, or they're in the fold of those caliber players. And really, quite honestly, Shaw, I've yet to see any of these caliber players live up to their potential. So maybe now without Sam Hinkie, they will finally have a process in place to properly select the talent that 76ers fans can truly get behind and feel confident is going to be one of the pillars for that organization. Okay, out in Miami, now that the season is over with, Pat Riley and those boys making it be known, Hassan Whiteside is their number one priority, their focus in free agency. Is that noise, or is there an actual action plan in place?
Well, it makes sense if you're the Miami Heat. They couldn't really focus without him. And if you don't know what the status of Chris Bosh is, you definitely need to have that quote insurance with Whiteside. I was just surprised that Riley came out and said it so early. They're usually not very vocal about what their plans are, what they're going to do in free agency. But Riley was very forthright, said they expect Wade to be back, expect Haslam to be back, expect a lot of people to be back. They didn't talk too much about Deng, but Whiteside is definitely going to be their focus. And it looks like they're going to have to give him that max deal after all.
All right. Out in Sacramento, as if these guys really cannot stay off the social media and out of the public eye, just try to handle business. But let it be known, the Sacramento Kings will not be in a bidding war for Rajon Rondo. I'm sure the Rondo camp is feeling very disappointed about this.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny that they came out, or, it was reported that this was said from Sacramento, that, they feel like, hey, they gave Rondo a chance when nobody else wanted to. He thrived in their system, so that he in essence should be loyal to them if necessary. But if it's 4 or 5 teams going after Rondo, I don't know if that the market will be that heavy for him. But if it comes down to that and he wants $15, $16, $18 million a year, Kings aren't going to be willing to pay that. So I think he's going to have, they'll get an offer, and whether he likes it or not, they'll make a decision after that.
Whose system? the Sacramento Kings system or George Karl's system? Because I don't think they got a system at this point, right?
Well, in terms of the pace in which they played, which is, came a lot from their owner too, and Karl did at least adhere to that. He wanted to play fast, and they did play fast, and he led the league in assists this year. So he does have a little bit of leverage, but not much more than that.
Well, now they can go back to playing furious, because that's exactly how DeMarcus Cousins is going to start feeling if things don't really start shaping up like this organization is trying to do what's necessary to get this team in a winning situation. Out in Los Angeles, Brian Shaw set to become the Lakers' top assistant. Although, if you're Brian Shaw, should you really feel good about that notion?
Well, I think you're Brian Shaw. You want to get back to where you're comfortable and maybe even build your reputation back a little bit. It took a big hit in Denver for how that situation played out, and even though it wasn't all his fault, he definitely contributed to it. So I think going back to the Lakers and going under a great young mind, if you will, in Luke Walton, an organization that he does know and quote unquote trust. Maybe he does feel like this is a good situation for him, especially with they're going to have some young talent coming in there. Got the number 2 pick in the draft lottery. Whether they keep it or not, we still don't know. But the Lakers situation seems to be moving in an upward direction in terms of talent. So I think Shaw maybe wants to be a part of that, as he was a great talent evaluator and a person that can definitely cultivate some of the young talent that he's had in the previous destinations.
Yeah, but Shaw, it is kind of funny though when you think about it. Brian Shaw now again, handing it off to Luke Walton. Luke Walton, like this is be Brian Shaw's time, and I'm sure in his mind he's thinking, how the heck is Luke Walton running things over me now? Like this, after a while, if you're Brian Shaw, you got to start recontemplating, you got to start resituating, your long-term goals when Luke Walton is leaping ahead of you in the coaching totem pole, bro.
He could be a little jelly, but I think, same thing. He just has to be humble in this and understand that, hey, he got his chance. It didn't go exactly the way he wanted. So if he does well in this situation, there's a lot of talk about assistant coaches in this off season right now. So I think Shaw recognizes that. So he's just going to try to go there, rebuild, and if he does a good job with the Lakers, especially with the new talent that they have coming in, he's definitely going to get another shot somewhere else.
All right, Shaw, man. Once again, what a hell of a show we have pieced together. A masterpiece of multiple personalities all chiming in and really keeping us abreast of things that are happening right now, Shaw. I mean, so much is going on, and we're still focused on everything happening, with the conference finals. But, we really have to be focused and paying attention to the moves that are being made by teams who have been major players and teams who are part of major markets that may have an impact about where this offseason is really going to lead to. I know people's attention have been focused on the combine. I know people's attention are focused on the draft and the draft lottery. But, listen, these hirings and the dynamics, especially from when we got our man from Max Croes and what we've gotten from Jared Dubin, is a lot is telling us that the dynamics in the management and in their coaching selection process seems to be tantamount to the direction of how much, fans have to be, feeling optimistic about with their favorite team.
And the league is a constant business, so just because the playoffs are going on, it doesn't mean 26 other teams or the other teams not currently in the spotlight aren't working and aren't trying to better themselves for the upcoming season. I think that's what you've seen here with this week's show, talking about a couple of teams who were, made some coaching decisions, one that still has yet to be decided as recording up this show, and all the things that are associated with being an NBA team in the association and what it means to work consistently throughout the year. So I think this show really represents that. I think a lot of times too, you forget about the intricacies, not only going to the coaching hiring, the head coaching hiring, but the assistants that go along with that too. I think you've heard a lot of discussion about that with Max Croes, talking about the Rockets are looking for an associate head coach as well to kind of maybe head up the defense if they decide to go in a certain direction, or to head up a certain aspect of the player development. And the same thing with Jeff Hornacek, who's going to come onto his staff. Wojo and all those guys, they've been tweeting about assistant coaches being hired all week. So it's not even just the head coaching thing that we need to focus on, and just really goes to show you what it takes to build a successful NBA franchise. It really starts from the head, so at the top of the organization, all the way down to the coaches on the sideline next to the head coach as well.
Yeah, man. And look, again, these next few weeks, I really think are going to be absolutely critical, not just, from a perspective of, what these teams are going to be dictating and who's going to be rolling out the red carpet and pretty much, wooing the free agents, but it's going to be pretty hectic for us as well too, because a lot of everything that is going to happen over the next couple of weeks has been predicated over things building up from, really, you can go as far back to the trading deadline and what should have happened and what did happen and what didn't happen. And so now all roads lead to what is going to take place, in the months of June, July, and ultimately August before we start talking about training camps and eventually the preseason and regular season for 2016. And it's just been absolutely awesome. We'd like to thank our special guests, Jared Dubin, Max Croes, for jumping on board, helping us get insight on two teams, especially in the Houston Rockets and the New York Knicks. And of course, my man Shaw bringing the butter goods as usual, man. Again, man, I feel like we're Siamese twins on this, man. I'm the more boisterous one. You're the more logical one. But together, we're like Sherlock Holmes. And who's the doctor that he usually loves to...
Watson?
Yeah. I call him IBM, but yes, Dr. Watson. You're like Dr. Watson. You relatively bring me back to ground zero, even though I come up with all of these crazy conspiracy theories and this fallible thinking of mine. But sometimes I could be right.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that, man. I think that's what makes the show so dynamic. Hope everybody does enjoy listening. And please, we need those ratings. Hook us up. Hook a brother up. We need those ratings, man. iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, everything. We need to hear back from you, just that we can move up with the rankings as well, so that this your favorite show, your favorite NBA podcast, can continue to come to you on a regular basis. We can start to bring in some even better guests and even some players and all those things too. We need those ratings, guys. So hook us up, man, and we'll definitely make sure that we're hooking you up with all the greatest in NBA news week to week.
Most definitely, man. So for the baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, once again, we appreciate you guys, and we'll catch up with you next time.